Good evening, and welcome to the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. My name's Kathy Garretts, and I'm one of the curators here. I'd like to welcome you to this program, which is part of our ongoing Documentary Voices series, co-curated by Denise Gokturk, who's here, as well as her class. Attended as well by her class. So it's a real pleasure to welcome Lynne Sachs, who's here from New York to give the Les Blank lecture and to show a few of her films. It's an annual lecture that's given in memory of the local filmmaker Les Blank, who you see here at the Flaherty Film Festival, and that's Lynne a number of years ago with him. For those of you who don't know his work, Les Blank made a wonderful array of films that are filled with the life of the back roads of the US. Music, food, dance, that's very particular to place. It's very of the land, of the spirit of a place. And he was a wonderful example of what it is to explore and take pleasure in what is distinctive and perhaps unfamiliar. So his films really brought a great deal of joy to all of us. And so it's really special for us to have this opportunity every year to take a pause and remember what he offered us in the way we think of what a document can be, what it can be to bring to life a culture, a place, a people. So this year, we're kind of playing catch up with the Les Blank lecture. So earlier in the year, we had our 2020 lecture with Trinh Minh Ha. We closed down just days before she was scheduled to give it. And it gives us a chance to think about to ask filmmakers who are working contemporarily to talk about their approach to documenting, to thinking about the world creatively. And so we're really pleased that the 2022 lecture will be given by Lynne Sachs. In many ways, she's dedicated her work to a poetic approach to both image and word, and extending the possibilities of both of them. So I'm just going to take a little parenthetical moment to mention that one of her recent books, her most recent book, Year by Year Poems, was published by Small Press Books here in Berkeley, or is at least being distributed by them. And we have it in our bookstore thanks to Grant Kerber, who's here this evening. And it was available up at the, to look at up at the, where you buy tickets, and it'll be in the bookstore in the coming weeks. So hope you'll take a chance to look at it. And in that book, she marks what was, when it came out, 50 years of her life through writing a poem for each year. And so at least 30 of those, she was also making films. So we're very honored here at BAMPFA to have a number of her films in our collection, a very strong group of her work, including all of the works that we're going to show tonight. And I think those of you who know her films know that you can, through them you find like reverberations and echoes between personal experience and social reality, between history and present-day issues. And that's particularly highlighted in the program tonight. And the program tonight is also very in sync with the Doc Voices class, which has been looking at labor and laborers. So here in one of the films tonight, Washing Society, we have attention to the work of keeping clothes clean and folded, work that some might say is largely invisible, and when it is paid is underpaid or underrecognized. And in fact, Washing Society moves between two strikes amongst many other concerns and issues. And we begin the program with two recent shorts by Lynne that both deal with types of protest, whether public protest or individual protest. And there's added resonance thinking of that when we're all very aware of the protests and resistance going on right now against the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. So that when we were planning the program, it didn't have this echo, but it does now. Washington Society is collaborative in many ways, and not only in that she made it with another filmmaker, Lizzie Olesker, so I want to mention that. And also tonight's event is very collaborative, so I want to be sure to mention that it's presented in collaboration with a number of other venues. Tomorrow, Lynne's going to screen her most recent film, a film about a father who, at Oakland's Shapeshifters, and that screening is in conjunction with the San Francisco Cinematheque. And then on Saturday, first beforehand, there's a 5 p.m. workshop also at Shapeshifter on opening the family album. And then on Saturday, there's another chance to see that film at Other Cinema. And that, I mean, maybe Lynne will mention it's a fundraiser in some way for around Ukraine. So it's my pleasure to introduce and welcome Lynne Sachs. Join me in welcoming her.
When PFA curator Kathy Garretts invited me to give the 2022 Les Blank lecture, all of my experiences, challenges, obstacles, and revelations regarding what constitutes the real came tumbling into my mind. I immediately confronted and embraced the life I've led in the cosmos of the cinema, and more specifically, my I.O.U, my gratitude to that reel for simply providing me with so much to think about and so much to record with my camera. Tonight, I will share with you a selection of observations I have made in the course of creating approximately 50 films, installations, live performances, and web art projects. Whether a 90-second cine poem or an 83-minute feature, I learned early on that my process of making films must push me to engage directly with the people with whom I'm working in a fluid and attentive way. I've never truly been comfortable with the term director or the hierarchical configuration of a movie set. I am a filmmaker who looks for other committed artists who are willing to collaborate with me in an adventure. These inventive souls are not my crew. We talk, we listen to each other. I pay them for the time and for their time and expertise, and then we set off on a journey. Of course, there are the people in front of the camera too, what many documentary makers refer to as their subjects. In narrative film, these are the actors, or thinking in the aggregate, the cast. Again, I find both of these terms, both of these monolithic terms, anathema, an insult to their human presence. From my very first 16-millimeter film, Still Life with Woman and Four Objects, made in 1986, I asked the woman, the star of the film, to extract herself from the objects in order to shake things up for me. I wanted her to shift away from simply being a living, breathing prop. I invited her to bring something from her home that meant a great deal to her to our first day of shooting. She delivered a framed black and white photograph of early 20th century feminist anarchist Emma Goldman. At the time, I had no idea who Emma Goldman was. I quickly learned. I and my 4-minute film were forever changed. I'd claim for the better. I've been listening and learning from the people involved in my films ever since. This leads me to another, perhaps more intricate form of entangling myself in the creative process. Between 2011 and 2013, I worked with 7 Chinese immigrants between the ages of 55 and 80, living in the so-called Chinatown areas of New York City. Together, we made Your Day is My Night, a hybrid documentary on their immigration experience and their lives in the place each of them calls home. Hybrid is the key word here, for it was my interaction with these participants that sparked me to find a completely new approach to my documentary practice. I started this project with the intention of discovering more about these people's lives through a series of one-on-one audio interviews. Then I turned each of these conversations into a monologue that I gave back to each person so that they could perform their own lives by both memorizing their lines and also improvising, all in a dramatic context that gave them the freedom to express themselves and a release from the intimidation and vulnerability of not knowing what would happen next. According to the 7 people in my film, this in turn gave them the liberty to play with their spoken words with whim and impetuousness, not to feel indebted to the limitations of their own historic realities. At my performers' insistence, we ultimately moved the hybrid nature of the piece one step further. As a group, they pushed me to search for a story beyond their lives. They wanted me to make their job of articulating their experiences more interesting. So I brought in one wild card, a Puerto Rican woman actor who would move into their shared filmic apartment. Her arrival transformed the piece into a story that embraced each person's immigration experience without being confined by it. Over a 2-year period, we took our live performance with film to homeless shelters, museums, universities, and small theaters throughout New York City. I then turned our collective work into a film. From this experience, I learned that even a more conventionally narrative film is simply a documentation of a group of people making something together. My integration of a traditional observational mode with a more theatrical engagement gave me the chance to reflect on the work I had done over 25 years earlier as the sound recordist on Trinh T. Minh-Ha's Surname Viet, given name Nam. This film also challenges monolithic notions of documentary truth. Some of you saw it in this very room when Minh-Ha gave the 5th and the 2020 annual Les Blank lecture. I also wanted to share something about the exhibition of Your Day is My Night, which adds another layer to our conversation around collaboration, both within the film's production structure and its exhibition. The first evening that we presented this piece to an actual audience, there was a rather typical post-screening Q&A. There I stood with all the participants in the film. When members of the audience asked these 7 Chinese immigrants to the U.S. how they felt about working on this rather experimental film, they all became quiet. Then they whispered together, and a few minutes later, one spokesperson came forward to say simply, "We do what Lynne tells us to do." There was a hush in the room. No one knew what to say. Honestly, I felt embarrassed, at a loss for what to do. I put my microphone down, walked over to the group, and explained that in the U.S., it was okay for them to say whatever they wanted publicly, to express their feelings about their experiences without any punitive repercussions. At the next screening, they each energetically took the mic from me, or grabbed it. With the help of a translator, they articulated their own interpretation of our shared creative process. Never before had they had the opportunity to talk so freely in public in China or the United States. The performers in the Washing Society, which you will see tonight, gave me another kind of gift in terms of their response to an expansion of my creative process. In 2014 and 15, playwright Lizzie Olesker and I traipsed around New York City trying to record interviews with laundry workers. Most of them were recent immigrants who did not yet speak English or have their legal documents for living in the United States. Neither their bosses nor their husbands wanted them to talk to us. Thus, they refused to be on camera. So the two of us confronted this production obstacle head on. We conducted a series of informal, non-recorded interviews, and then we wrote a play that used the stories we'd heard as a source material for a live performance and film. We called it Every Fold Matters. We worked for over a year with 4 professional actors and dancers who were open to devising a strategy for making a site-specific piece that would be performed in actual laundromats around the city. In the process, we borrowed from reality in order to create a new hybrid reality. Vera Alba, one of our performers, was formally trained as a dancer, but also deeply influenced by the radical choreographic gestures of feminist thinker and filmmaker Yvonne Rainer. Through her physical investigations of folding laundry, the piece gained an exhilarating gestural vocabulary that gave our show and then our film its rhythm and musicality. Jasmine, an actor in the film with traditional theater experience, embraced our whole inclusive process so profoundly that she transformed herself from an eager, responsive actor into a generative contributor. One day during our rehearsals, she texted me with the words, "I've been living with my grandmother, Lulabelle, all of my life, but she never told me she had worked in a laundry from 1968 to 1998 until I started working with you all on this show." A few days later, we were filming with Jasmine and her grandmother while she conducted the first documentary interview of her life. She asked her grandmother about her collective actions for better wages and working conditions. The openness of our process gave her the chance to find out more about the woman with whom she'd lived all of her life. In addition, this intimate cross-generational exchange between 2 women in a family gave a new layer to our film. Now I'd like to take you on a journey through my aesthetic material trajectory as an experimental documentary maker. I need the word experimental here because it commits me to pursuing formal investigations of the medium. This is the only way that cinema can continually tackle, confront, even tickle my curiosity about the world. What is particular to me about cinema is its embrace of sound with, alongside, underneath, and beyond image. In the late 1980s, I made my first longer format documentary, Sermons and Sacred Pictures, a 30-minute portrait of Reverend L.O. Taylor, a Black Baptist minister who also shot 16mm film and collected sound recordings. At a certain point in the film, audiences are in total darkness while they hear the chatter of church congregants at a baptism in a river. At the time, this film was rejected for TV broadcast because the station producer assumed viewers would give up and turn off their televisions. I think at this moment about what theorist and poet Fred Moten calls hesitant sociology, and about the ways that we can integrate a propensity for abstraction into an endeavor to bring attention to a subject that might not have received its rightful place in history. Where do education and exposition end and aesthetic rigor begin? Do we necessarily lose the impact of the former when we give light to the latter? In Which Way is East, a diary film I made in Vietnam in 1994, I begin with a series of richly colored Kodachrome brushstrokes juxtaposed with my own voiceover, remembering what it was like to watch televised images of the war in the 1960s. As a 6-year-old child, I would lie on the living room floor, on the couch, with my head hanging upside down, watching the screen, inverting the images, unintentionally abstracting them somehow. At that age, I just barely understood the dismal war statistics I was hearing. Within my film, I decided to make this oblique reference to the archival images of the Vietnam War rather than delivering actual illustrations from the time period. That was enough. I expected my audience to work hard to fill in this absence, a pointer to the horrifying collateral damage of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Each viewer has to reckon with their own relationship to this history, as full or empty as it might be. At the time, I was cognizant of Belgian filmmaker Claude Lanzmann's refusal to provide a visual proof in the form of archival footage from the concentration camps. In his 1985 Shoah, an episodic series on the Holocaust. At that time in history, 40 years after the end of World War II, he felt that the haunting power of those images would be even more searing if his audience had to rely on their internal repository. Just in the last year, I had the chance to read historian and theorist Tina M. Kampf's Listening to Images, in which she prompts readers to look at archival footage in a way that forces us to hear what was never recorded, to bring our imaginations into the synthesis and recognition of a partial history that needs, at long last, a place in our communal consciousness. The lacunas are mended by my, your, and our active modes of participation. Both Lanzmann and I resisted the inclusion of images of horror, cautious about our own complicity by including them, assuming their implicit power that comes from absence. 2 weeks ago, I went to Berlin to shoot for a new film I am making called Every Contact Leaves a Trace. I spent several days talking with an 80-year-old German woman about many things, including the moment she first became aware of the concentration camp atrocities that had been committed by the Nazis, the everyday men and women who lived in her own town. She had the chance to watch archival footage of systematic killings and so much more in Alan Rene's 1956 documentary, Night and Fog. It all became absolutely clear. Here was the proof. When I heard this woman speak about the potency of these images, I immediately asked myself if I had failed in my own work. I'd assumed the existence of an internal archive of the horrors of the Vietnam War. In fact, it might not have been there, at least not to a younger audience. Had I failed in my own obligation to manifest a history that needed examination? In addition to a deep involvement from my compatriots in front of and behind the camera, I have come to expect a parallel engagement with my audience. In order for a multi-layered cinematic experience to happen, there must be a synaptic event that transpires. Only through this internal occurrence can we register meaning. My awareness of the aperture inside the camera convinces me that we must find intimacy with light. To accomplish this kind of charged flow from screen to eye. I have had the same Bolex 16mm camera since 1987. I know her well, and I feel as if she knows me. As we sit here together in this room, I would like to share with you just 5 images from my entire career as a filmmaker. They are part of my I.O.U. to light, the only continuous collaborator who has remained with me for all of these years. This is an image from Still Life with Woman and Four Objects, 1986, a film that falls somewhere between a painting and a prose poem. It's a look at a woman's daily routines and thoughts, interweaving history and fiction. This is the film I mentioned earlier with the framed photo of Emma Goldman. In this image of an avocado pit just peeled and prepared for growth, you see a slant of light of sunshine coming through a skylight in the ceiling. This is the first time that I truly learned how to transform via an awareness of aperture and f-stop what an eye sees into something only the camera can witness. Next. In window work, which I made in 2001, a woman drinks tea, washes a window, reads the paper. Simple tasks that somehow suggest a kind of quiet mystery. I'm the performer. Here, my hermetic domestic space is ruptured by a backlit newspaper. It glows. As cinematographer and performer, I discovered then how to sculpt light through silhouette. Next. In Your Day is My Night from 2013, immigrant residents of a shift bed apartment in the heart of New York City's Chinatown share their stories of personal and political upheaval. Here, light transforms Mr. Sui's profile into a gently sloping landscape. He fills the frame completely and in the process conveys awareness and presence. Next. Over a period of 35 years between 1984 and 2019, I shot 8 and 16 millimeter film, videotape, and digital images of my dad. Film about a father who, which is showing tomorrow night and Saturday, is my attempt to understand the web that connects a child to her parent and a sister to her siblings. Here my father has photographed 3 of my siblings playing in the water in the early 1990s. This time-worn image reveals my father's point of view. There is no detail, only light and color, affirming a quality of compassion and observation simply through the texture. Next. This is one of the last shots of film about a father who. It's clearly a degraded piece of old video, having lost all its color and detail. And yet, in its starkness, this high contrast black and white image evokes a pathos. After spending 74 minutes with me in the film, viewers are able to fill in what is missing. In each of these light sculpted images, I explored the concept of distillation, which has always been at the foundation of my work. I am an experimental filmmaker and a poet. Thus, I'm far more interested in the associative relationship between 2 things, 2 shots, or 2 words than I am in their cause and effect or their narrative symbiosis. For me, a distillation is a container for ideas and energy, a concise manifestation of a multivalent presence that does not depend on exposition. A distillation is not a metaphor. It's more like metonymy or synecdoche, where a part stands in for a whole and is just enough. I once asked a student of mine why she wanted to make documentary films. She told me that she wanted to make gifts. Just that single word helped me to better understand the ways that this kind of practice can embrace so much about life. Working with and beside reality allows us to feel allows us to feel relevant, but also gives us the chance to share something we love with others. Through his engaged, compassionate, ingenious approach to filmmaking, Les Blank gave us approximately 50 gifts. His vision of music, food, culture, and humanity came through every frame of film. I too have made about 50 films, web projects, performances, and installations. Like Les, each endeavor reveals my curiosity and awe for the world around me, my I.O.U. to the real. That's my lecture. Now I invite you to watch 3 of my films, and then we'll have a conversation all together.
Could you talk a little about why it is that you return to mixing between lengths, and also I was thinking as the program was going that was also true of Les Blank, that he had short work, long features, and this sort of in-between length, which sometimes, filmmakers find is a problem for them. Like, how do you program a 45-minute, a film that has an odd length?
Yeah, well, it wasn't that I actually never wanted to grow up and grow out of short films. And for me, that would kind of like be saying, well, I grew up and I gave up writing poems and I wrote novels, and poems helped me to do the ultimate thing, which was to make a long work. And I actually didn't really aspire to making so-called feature films or definitely not narrative films. So I get so much joy for making works of this length. I wish I didn't have to say short films, because that's in relationship to other lengths, but shorter films. I was actually on a panel this year for a film festival that had about 6 or 7 other films in the program around. I think I was showing epistolary, actually. And I discovered that every other person on this panel they were in conversation with, we were all together, every single other person said that their film was a calling card or a test for a feature film, and I almost just hit stop and jumped off. I was so frustrated. I mean, honestly, I was insulted, because they just saw it as a stepping stone to raising money, which raising money is very important. I know that, but for them to include it in the work, I mean, yes, it just was very, very frustrating. So, and I was definitely the oldest one there. So it's like, I felt like they were saying to me, aren't you going to grow up? Or I don't know, something. So to me, it's a shame, because it's such a pleasure to make a work that has its own shape and doesn't have to aspire to some kind of other presence in a room. And so I like making short films as much as longer ones, sometimes more.
Were you aware while you were making the film of this radical shift to going online, or was that something that occurred during the long process of working on this?
So it was very interesting to watch this film, which was finished in 2018, thinking about the pandemic. I kept looking around for people to be wearing their mask, but nobody in the film, let alone myself, knew what was coming down the pike. So now it is the story of the changes around labor, particularly in a large city, and the move away from people doing their own work, cleaning their own things, to having someone else do it. But because of the pandemic, we're also aware that if those laundry mats weren't being used, those clothes were still being cleaned. So therefore, as we all know, the people who are doing the service were just doing it in a more unrecognized or invisible context. So the dangers during COVID, the dangers of working side by side with someone else were still there. And we all know what it's like. The people who deliver, it's not just the people who wash clothes, the people who cook, the people who delivered all those boxes, all those things still happened. So I kind of like watch this not with a omniscience, because it's just with a shift away from that period in time. We all know that it's sort of like we're now in that was BC, but before COVID, and now we watch it just with another awareness. So that maybe had more of an impact on me tonight than the fact that so many of the laundries have closed, because there are actually still thousands of them. Maybe not in, I don't know what the situation would be in the Bay Area, but are there many laundromats? Yeah, so they still exist. And when I was talking about the buildings where people would have their clothes picked up, that actually happened. I was about to go shoot at a laundromat and it had been closed. And so I said, well, where are people going to do their laundry? And one of the construction manager who was demolishing the laundromat said to me, well, Monique will do it. And I said, what? There's a French woman here who's washing clothes? And he said, no, Monique is an app. And I just was like, that's crazy. It's feminized, it's Anglo, it's French, and she is not an it. So I just was like rolling my eyes, but that was quite disturbing to me at the time, but it happened.
Any questions or thoughts that you'd like to share with Lynne? In the middle, right there. They're coming from the other side.
Thanks for the documentary. And
You're welcome.
First, I really like your pen.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate your saying that. We'll talk later. I'll tell you where I got them.
Thank you. And I have a question that I notice when people speak in their native language, some like Cantonese and Spanish, sometimes they have the subtitle with it, but sometimes the audience doesn't see the subtitle. I wonder if you do that intentional or...
Definitely intentionally. You couldn't have asked a better question. Translation and resistance to translation and playing around with subtitles has been a really big part of my work, going back to the mid-90s when I made a film called Which Way is East, which I made in Vietnam. And we have, my sister speaks Vietnamese, but we kind of made that film together a bit. And so in that film, you have Vietnamese parables that sometimes are translated and sometimes are not. And then you have this notion of this American woman trying to be able to understand them. So that effort to translate is really important to me. I've always thought that subtitles are inherently a problem because they make us stop listening. And they deliver to English-speaking people this ability to be oblivious to what really is being said and to privilege the dialogue over the image, and never to allow English-speaking people to have the alienation of being an outsider. So I wanted to explore that formally. So I would guess there was a language that you understood. And so maybe how did that make you feel that you understood it and probably a lot of people in this room didn't understand it?
I only speak Mandarin, but I don't speak Cantonese, but I could understand partly of a person speak Cantonese, but I feel like there's deeper degree of connection when people say that they are telling their lives through their own language, which I think is very important because it gives them certain amount of respect that we are the people who wants to know their life instead of they are telling ours. Like they are telling the English speaker people their lives through English.
Well, if you got that from this film, I am I just feel really happy because that also brings one of the things that I was talking about in the film, I mean in my talk, my lecture, was that active engagement of an audience. So you're not just watching my movie and maybe enjoying it and maybe not and seeing a little bit of something, a life in New York. You're actually thinking about how the material and how the experience, whether you call it art experience or a movie experience or how you are interpreting it, how you are reading it. It's not just that you're doing it, but you're thinking about your own process. So you have a very engaged process, and so do I. So we are coming together on that plane. So that's so interesting to me, and I appreciate it.
And I also really like you connect the dancers with the laundry room. I feel like you make them become more creative. Therefore, people could have more respect to them instead of just seeing them as some like mundane work.
We thought a lot about that. You know, we wanted to energize the room. By the end, you see the banging, but it's, you know, usually if you bump into a machine, you hurt your knuckles, but instead they do it with a kind of confidence and they do it with a sense of choreography. And as I talked about in the lecture, part of the kind of vocabulary that we came up with was from Vera Alba. She's a Puerto Rican woman who lives in New York and a dancer and a performer. And I actually I could send it to you, but I have this video I made with my cell phone when we were doing rehearsals where she just started banging around on the table. And we just said, the word in the theater world I've learned is called to devise. So she did something and then we integrated it into our piece. And therefore she had that sense of being, as you said, like of being a creative person, not just being told by us what to do. She made that very explicit contribution. And so I think it hopefully is something that she feels excited about that is different from feeling excited about being on a big screen. It's being very actively part of the creative process. One other thing I wanted to say about Cantonese, when I was teaching at different points when I've had students in New York, they've told Chinese American students, they've told me about that rift, that division between Mandarin and Cantonese. Sometimes they couldn't even talk to their grandparents. So in another film of mine, are you in the documentary class? Are you in the class here? Are you one of the students in the documentary class? No, you're not. Okay. Well, again, if you meet with me later, I can give you the link for Your Day Is My Night, which has Mandarin and Cantonese, and it's I also play with translation.
In the middle, Steve. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Lizzie Olesker is a dear friend of mine and a neighbor. She'd never made a movie before, and she's a playwright. So she had no background in film at all, but we started this piece as a live performance with film. So the live performance happened I mentioned a little bit earlier, but or maybe I was talking about Your Day Is My Night. The live performance, no, I was in laundromats for about a year. So the audience had to sit on the machines or stand up, and sometimes we had folding chairs. Then we did it, we'd like to say off Broadway, but it was like an open, not-for-profit space that happened to be near Times Square. So that was like bragging material. We're doing our show off Broadway. But we did it at a place called The Tank. We did it at the Lithographers Union. We did it at senior centers. We did it like all over the place, as Every Fold Matters. And then you actually would use the televisions that are in laundromats as our like audio visuals. And then I just kind of said, well, maybe we should turn this into a film. It's so unwieldy and it's really hard to take around to laundries, and then we're going to be done. Like we did it in 2014 and 15. And so she's like, really? You think we can make a movie? And I said, oh yeah. And then it took us 2 more years. So Lizzie had never been in an editing room, but so maybe her contribution to me had so much to do with how we worked in the space. Like you were talking about the choreography and how to inhabit the space, and how, frankly, how to direct actors. When we were working together, I was a nervous wreck because I wasn't used to telling people what to do. So we did lots of rehearsals for the live performance, and then and I had much to say, but I would end up whispering to her so that she would say it. And it was just funny because I wasn't used to kind of being bossy in that way. And so we added different things to the experience. I probably would say I'd never written a play of this. You only hear the play from the actors. She wasn't used to working in a hybrid way at all. So this mixing of reality with kind of narrative elements was completely unfamiliar to her. But we learned from each other. Like I would never use the word devise, and they use it in the theater world all the time. So it was almost like the vocabulary of each way of working was something that we introduced one another to. So I would just say that those were some of the elements. She loved sitting with me and Amanda Katz, who worked with us, and talking about transitions, because actually that was probably the biggest crossover. We both agreed that what made this film work was the transitions. So I was more confident about the transitions between shots, and they had to have a kind of synapse, like I was saying. And she had more experience with I don't like the word theatrical, but the theatrical sides of it and those transitions. So we each had a hunch that came from our own experience.
Anything else? Scott down here.
Hi, thanks for sharing this. I'm interested in kind of the evolution of the history of that industry in a way too, and Kathy was sort of hinting at it a little bit. And you start out with the place opening up in the morning, and the sun's coming in, she turns everything on, and then there's the guy who's talking about his day starting at 7 in the morning and works till 7:30 in the night, and that's during the daytime hours. And then at the end, you're sort of hinting at something about dropping stuff off in the late evening, and it's ready for you in the first thing in the morning. And to me, that's kind of like this black box that I don't know what that's about. And there's in the age of when taxi service is turning into Uber and Lyft and things like that.
That's fascinating.
I'm just wondering if you're drawn to exploring that.
That is so interesting. When I was making the film Your Day Is My Night, some of the documentary students are going to or have seen, but we'll be talking about in the class tomorrow at Berkeley, I thought about seasons because it took me 2 years to shoot. So we had like we had the clothing and the conversations and everything related to what was going on outside. We weren't in a, like, so often film can feel hermetic, but because we touched each season, like we were sweating and then we were freezing. So there was this relationship to what was going on outside. But I think what you're saying is about another kind of time, which is the cycle of one day. And in a way, that's a relationship to time that I don't usually inhabit in my work. And I think that this one is particularly relates to that because of like the idea that we have to have, well, in American society, this idea of having clean clothes every day. Years ago, when I was a junior in college, I lived with a French woman, and she was astonished that I changed my clothes every day. And I think about it now, and it was really odd. And but there, it's something that we're kind of taught. And the thing is, I didn't sweat that much. Why did I change clothes? Like, I actually was thinking today, everybody likes these pants. Maybe I should wear them tomorrow. And then I thought, but no, I live in America. I'm not supposed to wear the same clothes twice in a row. But now I think I've got to break that, because of this rules about like what is supposed to happen if you're part of the visible society and you're part of the non-visible society, which is the nighttime society. Like the notion that people order something and it comes the next morning because there's so much work going on at night, maybe more than ever before. The night is, which I think is what you're hinting at, the night is no longer rest, except for some people. So, I agree with you that all of it's been switched around in the last few years.
Right.
Nancy, did you see your name on the screen? Yes. Thank you for that. Yeah. The thing is, we have access to all of it, but we have to have the will to look for it. And so I was preparing this talk, and my husband, Mark Street, said, you have so many moments. He listened to it because I rehearsed a little bit, and he listened to it once, and he said, don't you think you need a place where you admit that you failed at something? And actually, I run this, I don't teach at NYU, but I run this once a year series like this one called the Experimental Lecture there. And it's all about failure. So I thought, oh yeah, I mean, every project has many failures, which I could just do a whole evening on failures, but which one will I pick? And I decided to wonder about my not including explicit imagery from the Vietnam War. Was I letting the people who committed those atrocities off the hook? And so at the time, I thought it took a stand because I said people have to have those archives in their heads, and they're still there. But now I wonder about it. So, and also time changes that. We could say time, like hindsight is 20/20. We understand it, we know, but actually, I think the farther we get from the incident, the more detached we are. It's just inevitable.
Okay. So I just want to remind everyone that Lynne's new film, which would maybe fall into the light collaboration with your family as opposed to the heavy collaboration such as this film and Your Day Is My Night, is screening tomorrow in Oakland and on Saturday in San Francisco. We've got links to both of those screenings on our website. So I want to thank you all for your comments and your concentration and for being here. And Lynn, thank you so much for the Les Blank lecture and your films.
I want to say one thing, that if I hadn't lived in the Bay Area for 10 years, I wouldn't make the films that I do today. The term experimental and the term documentary came together here like 3 decades before it did anywhere else. So I owe so much to reality and to the Bay Area. Thank you.